Charleston, South Carolina, where cobblestone streets whisper the secrets of empires, where sea winds carry echoes of revolution, and where the past still breathes in the present. This is not just a city. It's a living, breathing story. Long before the sound of horse hooves echoed through narrow alleys and church bells rang out over the harbor, the land that would become Charleston was a vast expanse of tidal marshes, dense pine forests, and winding rivers, home to Native American tribes such as the Kusabo. These were the original stewards of this land, skilled hunters, fishers, and traders who had called this place home for thousands of years. But change was coming, fast and relentless, across the Atlantic. In 1663, King Charles II of England granted a vast tract of land, the province of Carolinato, 8 of his loyal supporters, the Lords Proprietors. It was their reward for helping restore him to the throne after years of exile. These men, driven by ambition and economic dreams, envisioned a new colony on the southern Atlantic coast. And just 7 years later, in 1670, a ship named the Carolina arrived at a place called Albemarle Point along the Ashley River. The settlers who disembarked were the city's first European residents, and they named their small settlement Charles Towne in honor of the king. Life was hard. Swamps bred disease. Food was scarce, and the unfamiliar climate tested every ounce of the settlers' resilience. But Charles Towne survived, and before long, it began to thrive. By 1680, the settlement was moved to a more defensible peninsula between the Ashley and Cooper Riversland, better suited for trade and protection. This new location became the heart of what we now know as Charleston. The city was designed with walls and bastions, built not just for defense from native attacks or rival colonial powers like Spain or France, but also for control. Its earliest economy was fueled by deerskins, lumber, and livestock. But Charleston would quickly evolve into something far greater and far more complex. The warm, humid climate was ideal for rice cultivation, and enslaved Africans, many from the rice-growing regions of West Africa, were brutally forced into labor on plantations across the Lowcountry. Their knowledge of rice farming helped create what would become one of the most profitable crops in the South. Indigo soon followed, used for dye and shipped by the ton to Europe. Charleston became opulently rich. But its wealth was built on bondage, on the backs of human beings stripped of their freedom, language, and identity. By the early 1700s, Charleston was one of the busiest ports in North America. Ships arrived daily, carrying goods, news, and people, some seeking opportunity, others brought in chains. It became a city of contrasts. Grand townhouses with sweeping piazzas and crystal chandeliers rose near damp alleys and slave markets. Elegant churches stood near auction blocks. Refinement and brutality coexisted. Charleston also became a cultural hub. Its residents prided themselves on civility and intellect, importing the finest European furniture, books, and fashion. It was a city that dressed in silk and spoke in polished tongues, yet beneath the surface, an unspoken truth simmered on that would explode in time. As the 18th century drew on, tensions began to rise between Britain and her American colonies. The people of Charleston, while deeply connected to the crown through trade and loyalty, also felt the sting of taxation and imperial control. The seeds of revolution were being planted, and in 1773, at the Old Exchange and Provost Dungeon still standing today, Charleston patriots held secret meetings. When the Revolutionary War erupted, Charleston was a strategic jewel, its port essential for both the British and the Continental forces. In 1780, it fell to the British in the largest American defeat of the war over. 5,000 troops surrendered, but Charleston never lost its spirit. When the war ended and the British withdrew, the city scarred, battered, and burned rebuilt itself. The post-revolution years were a time of transformation. Charleston redefined its identity, no longer a colonial outpost but a Southern American city with bold ambitions. But what had made it prosper roused its plantations. Its slave-based economy would soon push it toward conflict once again. Charleston entered the 18s with the same pride and prosperity it had cultivated for over a century. Its skyline, marked by towering church steeples and elegant mansions, told the story of its success. Its port remained bustling, and its society continued to thrive on the wealth of cotton and rice. But that wealth was not evenly shared, and the price of its elegance was paid in human suffering. By the early 19th century, Charleston had become the epicenter of the American slave trade. While cities like New Orleans and Richmond were also active, Charleston stood out. Nearly half of all Africans brought to North America in chains came through its ports. Sullivan's Island, just off the coast, served as the grim gateway for thousands of enslaved men, women, and children. They arrived broken, starving, sick-stripped of their identities, and thrown into a world that would seek to crush them even further. Within Charleston itself, the slave markets thrived. Families were separated, sold like property under the shadow of St. Michael's Church. Enslaved people built the very foundations of the city, from its cobblestone streets to its ornate homestand, yet were treated as invisible, as less than human. Still, resistance was never far. In 1822, a free black man named Denmark Vesey, a skilled carpenter and former slave, led one of the most daring and ambitious slave revolt plots in American history. Vesey, influenced by revolutionary ideals and the Haitian Revolution, allegedly planned to lead thousands of slaves in an uprising, seize weapons, kill the white residents of Charleston, and escape to freedom in Haiti. But before the plan could be enacted, it was discovered. Vesey and 34 others were hanged. Dozens more were exiled or imprisoned. The city responded by tightening its already brutal gripe-restricting movement, silencing black churches, and increasing patrols. The white elite of Charleston feared rebellion more than anything else. Despite this, black culture survived and grew resilient. The Gula people, descendants of enslaved Africans in the Lowcountry, preserved their language, food, music, and spiritual beliefs. Their traditions, shaped by pain and perseverance, would become one of the most distinct cultural legacies in all of America. As tensions between North and South deepened over the issue of slavery, Charleston once again found itself at the heart of national conflict. The 1850s were a decade of division. Southern pride burned hot in Charleston. Many of its citizens, bound to the plantation economy, viewed any threat to slavery as a threat to their way of life. And then came the breaking point. On the 20th of December, 1860, in Charleston's Institute Hall, South Carolina became the first state to secede from the Union. The crowd erupted in cheers. Church bells rang. Cannons roared. It was a moment that would change American history forever. Just 4 months later, on the 12th of April, 1861, the first shots of the Civil War were fired at Fort Sumter, a federal stronghold in Charleston Harbor. The Confederate attack lasted 34 hours before the Union garrison surrendered. The war had begun, and Charleston was its birthplace. The war years were brutal. Charleston became a symbol of Confederate defiance. Union forces blockaded the harbor, strangling trade. For nearly 2 years, the city endured shelling from nearby Morris Island. The proud mansions of the battery trembled with every blast. Fires ravaged entire blocks. Disease spread. Food grew scarce. And yet the city held on until the end. When Union troops finally entered Charleston in February 1865, they found a city reduced to ashes and ruin, but they also found a city freed. Enslaved men and women danced in the streets, wept with joy, and lifted their eyes to a horizon they had never before been allowed to see. Among the Union troops was the 54th Massachusetts, one of the first black regiments in U.S. History, whose bravery had become legend after their failed but heroic assault on Fort Wagner just outside Charleston in 1863. Their blood had soaked into the sand for freedom. Now, they marched through Charleston as liberators. The Civil War was over, but Charleston's story was far from finished. The war had ended, but the wounds it left behind in Charleston ran deep. The city lay in ruin, economically shattered, physically scarred, and socially divided. Once the wealthiest city in the South, Charleston now found itself stripped of its enslaved labor force, burdened by destruction, and struggling to redefine its identity in a world turned upside down. Reconstruction brought with it both hope and turmoil. For the first time in its history, Charleston saw a dramatic shift in power. Freedmen, once a considered property, now walked the same streets as citizens, voters, and office holders. Schools were built for black children. Churches thrived as centers of community and political activism. Men like Robert Smalls, born enslaved in South Carolina, became national figures, proof that a new era might be possible. But not everyone welcomed the change. White supremacists organized quickly. The Ku Klux Klan and similar groups terrorized freedmen, burned schools, and murdered political activists. Violence was not the exception. It was the tool of resistance to change. In Charleston, racial tension simmered just beneath the surface of polite society. The city's old elite, no longer masters of a plantation economy, found themselves trapped between nostalgia and the harsh reality of modern America. Then, in 1886, nature delivered a blow that even war hadn't. On the 31st of August, in the quiet of early evening, Charleston was rocked by a massive earthquake of the most powerful ever recorded in the eastern United States. Chimneys crumbled, church steeples toppled, rail lines twisted. People ran screaming into the streets as buildings collapsed around them. The quake was felt from Cuba to New York. Over 100 people were killed, and thousands more were injured or displaced. But Charleston refused to fall. In the weeks and months that followed, the city began rebuilding yet again. Out of tragedy came resilience. By the dawn of the 20th century, Charleston had entered a new phaseless grand, less powerful, but still deeply proud. Tourism began to trickle in. People came to see the city's grand antebellum homes, its moss-draped trees, and its romanticized past. The preservation movement took hold. Charlestonians clung fiercely to their historic identity, preserving architecture, language, and tradition with near-religious devotion. Yet even as the city presented a graceful exterior to the world, the cracks in its foundation remained. The legacy of slavery, segregation, and inequality continued to define daily life for many of its residents. Jim Crow laws made sure of that. Black Charlestonians faced segregated schools, limited job opportunities, and second-class treatment in every corner of public life. They were expected to know their place in a city that claimed to honor history but often forgot whose blood had built it. But they never stopped pushing back. Community leaders, teachers, and pastors fought for dignity, education, and the vote. The seeds of the civil rights movement were being sown, quietly but powerfully. Charleston's old port, once a hub for slave ships and merchant fleets, grew quiet for a time. Industry shifted elsewhere. The city became more provincial, more inward-looking. But beneath the surface, change was coming. By the mid-20th century, Charleston stood at a crossroads. Its cobblestone streets, shaded by centuries-old oaks, whispered the stories of empires, revolutions, and tragedies. But now a new battle was taking shape that would play out not on battlefields but in classrooms, churches, buses, and courthouses. The civil rights movement had reached the Holy City. Black Charlestonians had long endured the indignities of Jim Crow laws. From segregated buses and schools to unfair housing and voter suppression, the barriers were relentless. But as the 1950s turned into the 1960s, A new generation stepped forward determined, fearless, and unwilling to wait. In 1969, Charleston became the epicenter of one of the largest hospital workers' strikes in Southern history. The medical college hospital strike was led mostly by black women maids, cooks, and aides who worked long hours for low wages with no recognition. Their demands were simple: fair pay, respect, and the right to unionize. Their protests rocked the city. For over 100 days, they marched through the streets, chanted for dignity, and faced off against police and political leaders. Even Coretta Scott King, widow of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., came to stand with them. Though their full demands were never met, their courage sent a powerful message. The struggle for equality was no longer silented, was on Charleston's front step. Charleston slowly began to change. Schools were desegregated, though not without resistance. Laws shifted, opportunities widened, but progress was uneven, and old wounds ran deep. As the years passed, Charleston transformed once more. The once sleepy port city began to awaken with new life. Artists, musicians, chefs, and entrepreneurs began pouring into the city. The charm that had once drawn European merchants now attracted millions of visitors from around the world. The historic district became a postcard horse-drawn carriages rolling past pastel row houses and gas-lit alleyways. Charleston was no longer just a southern city, it was a global destination. But beneath the beauty, the past still stirred. In 2015, the city and the nation was shaken to its core. At Emanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church, one of the oldest black churches in the South, and a symbol of resistance dating back to Denmark Vesey's time, a young white supremacist walked into a Bible study and murdered 9 black worshipers in cold blood. The massacre stunned the world. How could such hatred still exist in a city that claimed to have evolved? And yet, in the aftermath, something remarkable happened. The families of the victims forgave the killer. The community rallied in mourning, not in rage. People from all walks of life, black and white, young and old, filled the streets, holding hands, praying together, demanding change. The Confederate flag, long flown at the South Carolina State House, was finally taken down. It was more than a political gesture, it was a signal that Charleston, at long last, was beginning to confront its ghosts. Today, Charleston stands as a city both proud and introspective. Its economy is thriving. Its food scene is world-renowned. Its streets are alive with the sounds of jazz, the rhythm of gullah spirituals, and the laughter of tourists exploring its timeless charm. But behind the beauty, there is reckoning. Schools and museums now teach not just the architecture of the Antebellum mansions, but also the history of the enslaved who built them. Historic plantations have begun telling the full story, not just of owners and wealth, but of labor, brutality, and survival. In 2018, the city issued a formal apology for its role in slavery, an acknowledgement centuries overdue. Charleston is not perfect. It is still a city with inequality, with divisions, with work to do. But it is also a city trying to understand where it came from, who it really is, and where it must go next. Charleston, South Carolina. A city where every brick has a memory, every breeze off the harbor carries a whisper of the past, and every sunrise glows with the quiet promise of redemption. It is a place of contrasts, fierce yet graceful, wounded yet resilient, haunted by its history yet determined to rise above it. From the cries of revolution in cobbled alleyways to the weeping prayers in church pews, from the clash of cannons at Fort Sumter to the silent footsteps of protesters marching for equality, Charleston has lived through it all. It is a city that was built upon contradictions. The wealth of its golden age came from soil soaked in toil and sorrow. Its beautiful facades once masked deep injustice. But the story of Charleston is not just about darkness. It is about light breaking through that darkness, about a people, black and white, who have fought and are still fighting to reclaim the soul of a city they call home. Today, Charleston welcomes the world. Tourists stroll through the historic French Quarter, snapping photos of Rainbow Row and dining on shrimp and grits beneath iron-laced balconies. Boats glide along the Ashley River, their wakes rippling into the past. The scent of jasmine fills the evening air, mingling with the sound of bells from St. Philip's Church and the rhythms of street musicians playing gula songs passed down through generations. But beyond the postcard lies the truth that Charleston is not just a city of ghosts, but of survivors. A place where history lives not in silence, but in conversation. In the classrooms teaching hard truths. In the tours that no longer skip over slavery. In the museums built not to romanticize the past, but to learn from it. In the voices of poets, teachers, preachers, and elders who refuse to let memory die. Charleston is healing. Slowly, imperfectly, but it is healing. And that is its greatest story. Not the cannons or carriages, not the opulence or fame, but the human journey, raw, unvarnished, real. The journey of a city learning how to look at itself in the mirror and say, this is who we were, this is who we are, and this is who we still must become. So the next time you walk through Charleston's narrow streets or gaze at the marshes beyond the sea wall, listen closely. The city is speaking, not just in its beauty, but in its truth. And maybe, just maybe, it's inviting all of us to write the next chapter. If you found this journey through time as captivating as the spirit of Charleston itself, don't forget to give this video a like, leave your thoughts in the comments, and share it with others who love history. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next untold story of the places that shaped America. Thanks for watching, and remember, history isn't behind us. It's all around us. Still alive, still unfinished. Just like Charleston,